Good evening, everyone. We're so excited to have you join us for the second segment of the MS NEURO TV video series. Our topic tonight is shared decision-making, effective communication with your MS team. Participating in tonight's webinar represents your active interest in learning and making connections within the MS community. We are so very excited to have so many of you join us on the line tonight. So moving forward into introductions, my name's Jennifer Falk, and I am the Director of Development over at MS Views and News. I am here tonight with Ana Cristina Fernandez de Castro, who is the Assistant Development Coordinator. Before we begin, we'd like to say thank you to our supporters for MS NEURO TV, Sanofi-Genzyme and Biogen. We are grateful for their support of this project and their continuous engagement and support of educational efforts for the MS community. We thank you. Tonight, we will begin by playing a 10-minute interview with Dr. Donald Negroski. Dr. Negroski has been a neurologist for 32 years and is the medical director of the MS Center of Sarasota, Florida. He's also a clinical assistant professor at Florida State University. Dr. Negroski has completed his fellowship in neurology at the Cleveland Clinic Foundation in Cleveland, Ohio. He has made numerous contributions to clinical trials and has been an expert presenter nationally and internationally in the field of MS. So, once the video interviews have finished, we will have Dr. Negroski live with us on the line for a 15-minute questions and answers session. Please try to keep the topics of your questions relevant to this evening's topic, which is communication and speaking with your healthcare team. Once we're completing the question and answer session, we will ask for you to complete a brief survey. So let's get started with tonight's MS NEURO TV episode video.
Welcome to MS NEURO TV, presented by MS Views and News. MS NEURO TV is a comprehensive educational program bringing together MS professionals from across the United States covering the topics that you want to learn more about. To register for MS NEURO TV webinars, visit www.msviewsandnews.org. Thank you. We hope you enjoy the program.
Dr. Negroski, many have asked, and so I'm going to have to ask you, what a clinician like yourself does, or how do they speak with an MS patient, like when they're first diagnosed, or if it's not just the MS patient, if the family is accessible to be there as well, how do you start the whole conversation with them?
So now that we have about 17 disease-modifying therapies, it's very difficult at times to come up with a single choice. And we tend to use what's called shared decision-making, which is a little bit different that we used to do years ago. It was more paternalistic, where the doctor would tell the patient what to do. And now the patients are very savvy. They do a lot of research. They know the ins and outs of these drugs. And they come to me with their own preconceived opinions about what therapies they should be on. Sometimes those decisions are correct, and sometimes they may not be as accurate as they should. And so it's my role is to try to inform them about disease-modifying therapies and the options. Not only the patient, but the caregiver, because that's extremely important as well. So what I'll typically do is go over the 17 drugs, the mechanism of action, the way that they're administered. 10 of them are subcutaneous injections or IM injections. There's about 3 oral pills, and now we have 4 infusion options. So it has changed. The landscape of treating MS patients have changed. The only caveat that I want to throw in here with shared decision making, there's a new player from insurance companies. There are pharmaceutical benefit management companies that kind of tier, and they tell physicians and they tell patients and their caregivers what options they have on their plan. So some of those options may not be the same options that we, the patient and the healthcare provider, came up with. They could be completely different options. So we have to kind of struggle through that as well. So there's actually 3 players to come up with the proper MS drug. So the patient, their care partner, which is one, the healthcare provider, and now the new player is the pharmacy benefit companies acting through the insurance companies. It's a challenge sometimes, it really is.
Thank you for that response. So how do you get them, though, to understand the various forms of treatments and get them to feel comfortable with knowing about what's available for them, and how they're even going to feel better about taking a disease-modifying therapy?
Well, information is very important to make an informed decision and be a member of the shared decision-making team. So I expect patients to have knowledge about the disease process and the medications. And some of that knowledge is given to them by different sources. You have authoritative sources, which are clinical trials that doctors use as a kind of a reference point. The clinical trials are like placebo-controlled, double-blinded trials. Many patients are enrolled, and we run statistics of the benefit of the drug and collect data on side effects, right? So that's what physicians look at. Patients tend to look at other sources. One source is direct to patient marketing, direct marketing from companies or commercials or advertisements. So that's one source that they have. They have other sources of information on the internet, such as MS Views and News, which is an excellent source that they can get all kinds of different information that's credible. Right? And then the other kind of sources are less credible, but important for them is just their friend that has MS, what worked for that particular person. And I caution the patients because MS is a diverse disease. What works on one patient may not necessarily work on their case.
Dr. Negroski, thank you very much for doing this interview series with us for 2018. And we're hoping that we can review and do some new things next year as well.
Okay, that was some terrific information. So now we will open up the line to you, our audience, to type in your questions for Dr. Negroski. Your questions will remain anonymous. Nobody can see them except us here reading them to Dr. Negroski. As I see your questions coming in, I will then relay them to him, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible, and we'll try to address them in the order that they are received. In order to type your questions, look at the GoToWebinar control panel that you're going to see on the right-hand side of your screen. You should see something that says questions, and then type questions there in that area. If you do not see that box, please click on the small orange arrow that's on the right-hand side of your screen, and the question box should become available to you. So now, without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Negroski, who's on the line. Welcome, Dr. Negroski.
Hi, hello everyone. First of all, I want to say that I'm honored to participate in this educational program and hopefully clarify any questions and concerns that you may have. Now, I also want to thank MS Views and News for the invitation to participate in this program. So I'm looking forward to questions you may have.
That's terrific. Thank you. We're honored to have you here with us tonight. And we have a lot of questions coming in on the line. So I'm going to read the first one over to you, Dr. Negroski. Here's the first question. What are the factors that you take into consideration when recommending a specific medication to a patient?
So, as I mentioned, it's a shared decision. So what I might think is the best treatment for the patient and their care partner may not think that's right. So first of all, I look at methods of administration. If a patient is willing to do injectables or oral medication and or infusions. And then I kind of look at their MS disease course, where they are in their progress with the disease, if they're newly diagnosed, if they have tried various other modalities, or if they have more challenging disease course. So if they're newly diagnosed, you kind of get a flavor in the first few years of how their MS is going to behave, so to speak. We never knew that, but we can kind of tell what patients may have a stormy course, so we may want to be more aggressive in those particular patients, recommend certain drugs along those lines. Or if a patient has a fairly benign course, we may not want to be as aggressive. So when I'm talking about aggressive treatments, I'm talking about efficacy of the drug versus the potential side effects. And some patients share with me their concerns about side effects. Some patients will want a drug that's extremely safe that may not be as efficacious, and some patients may just want the opposite. Some patients and their care partners would be willing to take a risk of a very serious and potentially life-threatening rare side effect and trade off efficacy. So it's a process that has to be individualized.
Okay, great. Thank you for that answer. Our next question we have is, how long does someone stay on a medicine before deciding it's not working?
So that's an excellent question. First of all, what is the definition of not working? So in relapsing MS patients, we look at three primary things. Sometimes we look at a few more. But the first thing is, if you have relapsing MS, are you having relapses on therapy? That's a red flag. Number two is if your MRI is active, meaning that you have more white spots or T2 lesions or enhancing lesions on your MRI on surveillance. And number three is if you have increasing disability as time goes by, as measured by your neurological exam when you go into your neurologist office. The fourth thing that we also look at is side effects. If you're having side effects that you don't like about the drug, then chances are you may not be taking it on a regular basis. The other caveat is that you don't want to be premature and give up on a drug. You want to at least be on the therapy for 6 months before you kind of change treatment pathways. So those are the things we kind of look at and at least bring up the conversation that we should either continue on your current therapy or look for a different therapy. And now that we have options, we have the liberty of doing that. Years ago in the early 90s, we had a limited amount of options. And the options that were available, some of them were in the same class of the way the drug worked on the immune system. So generally, my personal opinion is that if you're on a drug that works in a certain way on your immune system and it's not doing the job, then you should look at a drug that works on a different part of your immune system in a different way. And I've had some success of changing people on different drugs based on the mechanism of action.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Shifting a little bit towards communication here with this question, are patients allowed to record their conversations with their neurologist so that they can reference it later?
So I think each neurologist has their own comfort with that. Some would prefer not to have the conversation recorded, and some couldn't care less. So I think the best way you should approach that is ask them, ask the neurologist or the people in the room permission to record the conversation. So I think that's the best way to do that. I think the thing to record a conversation without full disclosure is probably not the right thing, because then that may lead to kind of some anxious moments down the road if the doctor realizes that he or she has been recorded without their permission.
That's great advice. Thank you. Shifting back to safety and efficacy, we have a few questions that are very similar regarding Limtrada, and I'm going to combine them. How safe is Limtrada, and how well controlled are side effects? Is it a safe product for long-term use, in your opinion?
So in terms of the safety of the medication or any medications, be it Limtrada or whatever, I urge people to read the package insert, which is that fine print. What package inserts are what they often do is they have updates as the years go by, and there's more data regarding safety and efficacy. The package, all that fine print can change, and you can ask your neurologist if there's been an update. Specifically with Limtrada, even though it works on the autoimmune system, the immune system, it paradoxically may increase your risk of autoimmune side effects. The issue with Limtrada is that there's a REMS program, which is a risk mitigation program that requires periodic and monthly laboratory tests. And the key with the side effects with Limtrada is early diagnosis of the side effects. The patients need to be aware of the potential side effects and what to look for, because more importantly, these side effects can be treated if recognized early. So having said that, Limtrada is generally given for a short course, perhaps for 2 years, with 5 infusions the first year, 3 infusions the second year, and oftentimes patients don't require any more infusions, but what they do require is ongoing safety monitoring. So that's my take on Limtrada. I think the efficacy and the benefit of the drug is good, and you have to just weigh the risk and benefits of the efficacy versus your tolerance to potential side effects and the ongoing need for monitoring. It is not the right drug if you don't want to be monitored, because it's vital that you continue to be monitored even after you stop the last infusion.
Okay, great. Very important information. Our next question is, when do you change stages from relapsing remitting to the next stage? What should one look for in changes?
Yeah, that's an excellent question because it gets to the root of the issue with MS. Some physicians say MS is MS. Stages are just that it's a disease process. So on day one, a patient comes in and they go, "What stage am I in, or what type of MS do I have?" And you can only know the type of MS in terms of relapsing remitting, secondary progressive, over time. So on day one, you don't know what kind of MS you have. But as the years go by, you may have less inflammatory lesions in the brain on MRI, you may have less relapses, but at the same time, you can have increasing or worsening of disability. So it's kind of it's a fine line when you talk about when you go from relapsing remitting to secondary progressive. Primary progressive is a little bit easier to kind of scientifically follow patients because they really don't get much better over time. You don't have discrete relapses where you actually really improve after relapse. So it's patients want to know what stages, but I caution them not to get hung up in stages per se. Well, even though it's important when you choose drugs, but to kind of look if your MS is active. So activity with relapsing MS is abnormal or new lesions on an MRI, or if you're having relapses, that's active relapsing MS. You can have active and inactive MS, but still have worsening of disability on your exam. So you have to look at those three things, as I mentioned before: MRI activity, relapse activity, and worsening of disability. And each one of those could be actionable in terms of how you treat patients.
Excellent, thank you. We're going to shift a little bit here. How do you handle a case when an insurance company recommends starting a treatment that you disagree with? What can I do as a patient in this case?
Unfortunately, that is becoming a very common scenario that a lot of neurologists are facing. Each year, January is very busy in neurology offices because the insurance company changes how they reimburse and what co-pays are and stuff. And a patient can be stable on a drug for, 5, 15 years and doing well without side effects. And all of a sudden they go to renew their drug at the beginning of the year and it's not on the proper tier and their copay goes through the roof. And the option is to go on a different drug that I disagree with. So that leads to phone calls, that leads to my staff being on hold, listening to music while someone tries to pick up the phone, and we write letters of appeal, and a lot of times we're successful with that, but it's a challenge. It really is. And patients know that it's a challenge because they're on the phone with the insurance companies as well. So I don't know the best answer to that, but it's becoming more difficult.
Okay. Yes, many have experienced this similar things like what you were discussing. We do have another question coming in. It says, I'm not a doctor, so I trust that my neurologist will make the best recommendation for me. Why do you recommend shared decision making over letting my neurologist make the decision for me?
Well, it depends what you're comfortable with. Some of my patients come in and the question that I kind of hear says, if it was your wife, what drug would you choose? Or if it was your mom or husband or whatever. And that's a very difficult question to answer, because the worst thing I can do is pick a drug, and the patient in their heart of hearts really feels very uncomfortable with the potential side effects or the way it's administered. So I try to, it's hard, but I try to kind of get in the person's mindset, where they're coming from, if they travel a lot, if they if they don't like side effects whatsoever, and so I kind of understand where they're coming from, and I tailor my conclusions to shared decision. I need to know what they're thinking about, but the ultimate decision is indeed mine, and I'll try to narrow it down to maybe two drugs. So that's where I'm coming from, and if you get the patient on board, they're going to be more compliant. That's number one. Number two is that if they really want to go on a drug that I don't think it's the best for them, I'll just say that. And I'll say, listen, I have plan B. If that doesn't work, we'll give it 6 months or a year. But if you're having breakthrough disease, then you have to understand that maybe we should look at a plan B or plan C. So as I mentioned, there's many drugs available. Each one it has their own pros and cons, and we try to make a good fit with the patient.
What a great response. Thank you, Dr. Negroski. I have another question. I never know if I'm having a relapse. How can I communicate with my neurologist if I'm always having issues and new symptoms?
So the neurological definition of a relapse is something new that you haven't had before with your MS, or worsening of an existing issue. So the first part is easy. If you have new symptoms that you haven't had before, that's kind of easy to understand. In general, relapses should last around 24 hours. Some people say 48 hours. More importantly, you shouldn't be sick with a flu or a fever or some kind of infection, because as you know, when you have those, your MS symptoms can exacerbate. So we call it a false exacerbation or pseudo-exacerbation. So aside from that, the more difficult thing is, can you have a relapse with worsening of your pre-existing symptoms? And the answer is yes. That's much more difficult to tease out, because on scans, sometimes we'll see relapses in the same location in the spinal cord or in the brain that their last MS scar was. So their scar, which was kind of dormant, and all of a sudden they have new symptoms, pre-existing symptoms, and you do a scan or an MRI, and all of a sudden it enhances, meaning it's a fresh exacerbation in the same area of involvement. And that means the disease is still active. So when patients, I tell my patients, I need to know when they call in to me or the nurse, if they think they're having a relapse, I need to know if it's a new symptom that they haven't had before, or existing symptoms that lasted at least 24 hours. And I want to make sure that they don't have a fever or a infection. So by just calling in and telling your neurologist those three things, he or she can further and I think more accurately diagnose if it is a true relapse and act accordingly.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. We're going to move to our final question for the evening. If you're on a current medication for MS, is there a time you would need to change the medication. For example, I've been on the same medication for 18 years. Do I need to be concerned that my body will become immune to that medication?
So it kind of depends what type of medication. Some of the injectable medications years ago, you can build up a resistance to the medication, and you can actually measure that with a blood test to see if you're kind of immune to the biological effects of the drug. There's only a handful of drugs that do that, and your neurologist knows that. But assuming that there's no blood test available to know that you're immune, I run into that all the time because patients say they're doing fine and they're not having any worsening of disability, their MRIs are stable. Do they even need the drug? And we really don't know the answer to that question in terms of taking people off of medication. There's an ongoing study that's going to be looking at that to follow patients that go off of drug that have been stable, and they will follow them with MRIs and exams and things like that very closely to see if and when it's feasible to stop a drug if you're doing fine for 18 years. If you're doing fine for 18 years and you stop a medication, are you at risk for the MS to come back, right? And so since there's no cure for MS, a lot of patients will say, well, if it's not broken, let's not try to fix it. Then they'll remain on a drug, assuming that they're able to tolerate it without side effects. So that's an excellent question. We don't know the true implications of stopping drugs in a patient that's stable. If you're on a drug and you're still having MS symptoms and signs and worsening, then I think you need to have that conversation with your neurologist to think about switching to another drug, as we covered, I think, with the first or second question tonight. So I hope I answered your question.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Negroski, for sharing such knowledge and valuable information with all of us this evening. This has been just tremendous. And again, we're very grateful. Thank you so much, Dr. Negroski.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Okay. Good night. And now I'd like to pass this to Anna Christina, who will give us some final information and thoughts.
Thank you, Jennifer and Dr. Negroski. We'd like to also thank all of you who have joined us today for our second webinar of MS Neuro TV. At the end of this webinar, please complete a brief survey. Your feedback is really important to us so we can continue to customize our events around our viewers. Please remember that our webinar series will be held every first Tuesday of the month, and next month's webinar will feature MS nurse practitioner Megan Weigel, as she shares with us some awesome tips on how to access medical care and MS resources, even when it might seem difficult. We'll keep you all updated this week through email and Facebook to let you know as soon as registration opens. If you would like to watch a recording of today's webinar, a video will be uploaded on our MS Views and News YouTube Learning channel. So please don't forget to subscribe and stay updated. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. For more information about MS Views and News, you can visit us at www.msvn.org. Finally, we'd love to thank Sanofi-Genzyme and Biogen for their support in making programs like this possible. Thanks again for joining us tonight, and we'll see you again next month.